Thank you for joining us for another edition of New Life Today. I am your host, Pastor Gregg Tipton. Listen, we're going to go back to talking about this 10-nation coalition that we see forming. And I believe we're watching it as it's beginning to come together. So stay with us. We are going to get into that here shortly. Ezekiel prophesies in a time that Israel is in great turmoil. There's a lot of stuff going on, and he gets a future glimpse. When he does, he gets a future glimpse of the things to come in the end days. And so one of those is a coalition or a group of allies that come together and they attack Israel. Now somebody said, well, isn't that going to be the Antichrist? Well, you got to remember the Antichrist has entered into a 7-year peace treaty with the children of Israel. He has come along somehow or another. He has convinced Israel to put their weapons down. There will be peace. Some way he has convinced the Palestinians that there will be the ability for them to coexist. And I mean, everything is just clicking right along. And of course, as always, you've got those who are aggressors, and they are going to have a struggle with staying on the sidelines. And this is when they come, this northern kingdom, Russia and its allies, come down in a time when Israel is at peace. Let me give you a verse of scripture that alludes to that. Verse 11 of Ezekiel 38 says this, "You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages." And he said, "I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take plunder." We don't know why he wants to take plunder. Don't know if they're having a financial difficulty and they see Israel prospering during this time because they're not having to spend as much money on military protection as much as they are able to now invest into their infrastructure and invest into their businesses and everything else. And so now there is a great city here to be taken plunder of. And so this coalition is going to come together. And we saw just the beginnings of it. We saw Gog, Magog, and now we've got Rosh, which phonetically, again, I mentioned in a previous video, which, by the way, you can find the links to the previous video in the comment section of this video. Take a look at that. But Rosh, phonetically close to modern-day Russia. But not only is it close to it phonetically, but it is also geographically in the same spot. So you've got modern-day Russia, which is ruled by Gog. That's just simply an individual. That's the prince that is ruling this. You've got Meshech and Tubal. Many experts identify these areas as territories in or around modern-day Turkey. It was Noah's grandsons, really, that founded Meshech and Tubal. You then have Persia mentioned, that he talks about in verse 5, the Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them. Persia, of course, we know it today as Iran. In 1935, they changed its name. They fiercely oppose Israel today. In fact, it was Ahmadinejad that said that they will push Israel back into the sea until they no longer exist. They call America the Great Satan, and they call Israel the Little Satan. They are fiercely, fiercely opposed to Israel. And so Persia will get in on this. Ethiopia, which is modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia. Cush, the grandson of Noah, was the founder of that area. Sudan is one of Israel's greatest enemies to this day. You then have Libya that is named, the same as modern-day Libya, founded by Put, which is a grandson of Noah. And so you've got Libya that's going to pile on. Gomer, which most Bible scholars believe is modern Germany. Once again, it's theorized because the name is phonetically close to Germany, Gomer, and it was Japheth that established Gomer, and then Togarmah, which is from the far north, Ezekiel 38 and 6, and that is more than likely modern day Turkey. Now, I've got to give a shout out to where I got these. It didn't just come off the top of my head. If you're wondering where I compiled this information, this was compiled in a study by Dr. David Jeremiah in his book. I believe it is the Book of Signs is the name of it. And so I'd encourage you to get that. As a great read. And he gives quite a bit of information on this. But these are the nations that are going to come together, and they're going to form an alliance. Now, you're beginning to see it. You're beginning to see it because, remember, Russia has been exercising aggression quite a bit. If you remember, in 2008, they invaded Georgia. I'm not talking about the state. I'm talking about the little country that's right there, kind of nestled. It's one of the Baltic states. It's right there nestled along with many of the other countries that the old Soviet Union used to possess and hold on to. And so they invaded it. They allowed some places to splinter off, a couple of little spots to splinter off from Georgia. And so there has been aggression since 2008. Even though 5 days afterwards they withdrew, there has still been undercurrents there. They're fighting. Now they're going after Ukraine, and they're threatening to invade Ukraine and to take this. And you've got all of these areas around Turkey and in that Middle East area that Russia at one point in time possessed. In fact, the USSR was the largest landmass country in the world and had the second largest economy until they went through their bankrupt due to inflation, which, does that sound familiar? Went through a great bankruptcy, and all of these areas broke up because they got bankrupted in the late 80s, early 90s, trying to keep up technologically with the United States. And so inflation went through the roof. When it did, it crashed their economy. Crime skyrocketed, violent crime, everything that you could think of. And doesn't it sound familiar? In fact, I was just talking with my wife just yesterday because I noticed on the news that now the Dollar Tree, and you may have some that don't know what that is now raising their prices to $1.25. So what are they going to call it? $1.25 store, or $1.25 store? I told my wife, I said, I've got a good name for them. For those of you that follow this, and please don't judge me, but there was a music legend some years ago that passed away by the name of Prince. And of course, through quite a few things, he ended up becoming known as the artist formerly known as Prince. So maybe the Dollar Tree store could call themselves the store formerly known as the Dollar Tree. But anyway, sorry, I did not mean to get off on that. That was just one of my sidekicks. But these nations are coming together, and we're beginning to see the aggression that is happening, and you're beginning. And here's the thing about it, is that you're seeing Russia also inject itself into the Middle East. Remember, they controlled Afghanistan for a long time, and they are now in Syria. And in 2015, they said, we're just going to be there for just a little while. Then in 2017, Vladimir Putin said that they were going to remain in Syria for the long term, and they have built a major base there, and they are injected in that. You've got other countries in the Middle East that are seeking Russia's help, and they are beginning to interject themselves. They are trying to become one of the largest players in the Middle East, and they are actually removing themselves from any type of dealing on the American dollar, because they are one of the largest exports of natural gas to so many countries that they now control a large portion of the world's economies through the natural gas that they provide. And so they are able to wreak havoc due to that. So you're seeing this power player that is beginning to rise up, and there's beginning to be, as Ron Rhodes in his book, Northern Storm Rising, he talks about Russia. You're beginning to see that northern storm rise. And so you're beginning to see these things come to pass, and these things happen. But remember, Jesus said you'll hear of wars, rumors of wars, Matthew 24:6. But do not be afraid, for the end is not yet come. These things must happen. These nations form a coalition. They're going to march against Israel. It will set the stage for a gigantic world war, which will focus on the Holy Land, the beautiful land, or as Daniel called it, the pleasant land. And though the northern armies of Russia and Turkey will lead the coalition, they'll be joined by Iran from the east, Sudan and Libya from the south, and possibly Germany from the west, in the form of a revived European coalition. Ezekiel paints a very, very bleak picture of what's going to happen. In verse 9, let's look at that. He says, "You will ascend, coming like a storm, covering the land like a cloud." He said, you and all your troops, and many peoples with you. Boy, it seems like a bleak picture for Israel, doesn't it? But listen to what God says to them. And God talks to them, and he gives them the reason of why he is allowing this. And look at what he says. He says in verse 16, and this is what it's all about, and this is what I want to leave you with. He says in verse 16 of Ezekiel 38, "You will come up against my people Israel like a cloud to cover the land." He said, "It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land so that the nation..." Now listen, he said, "I'll bring you against my land. I'm going to be the one that's going to draw you." In one verse of Scripture, he says, "I'm going to put a hook in your mouth and I'm going to draw you." Now there's been so many things that have been interpreted as that hook. Is it for the oil? There is great oil reserves in Israel. Is it for the trade routes on the water? They need the water, those straits, to be able to operate. There's so many things that could be a hook in the mouth of these individuals to be pulled towards them. And God says, "I'm going to bring you up against my people Israel. It will be in the latter days that I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know when I am hallowed in you, O Gog, before their eyes." God says the reason why I'm going to allow this to happen is he says, because I'm going to hallow myself in you. I'm going to show the nations of the world who I am through you. Now, there's some other verses of Scripture in the book of Revelation, the 16th chapter, and we're not going to have time to cover those. We'll maybe cover them on a different video. But we see in the 16th chapter as another coalition comes, and there's a great war that begins to break out. And then in the 20th chapter of Revelation, there is the time when Satan is released out of the bottomless pit, and he goes, and again, Gog and Magog are spoken about. And I don't have time to get into that. It's not the same Gog and Magog, but that terminology is used. Just as we would use, say that you've got a person that's they're a very good person. Say, oh, they're an angel. Well, they're not really an angel, right? They're just a good person. Or they're really mean. And we say, boy, they're a devil. Well, we know they're not the devil. They're just mean. And so we'll use those names repetitively in order to get the thought across of exactly what type of individual that is. And so you'll see that same spirit rise up in Revelation chapter 20 as Satan goes out for one last hurrah after he's released 1,000 years. Listen, there's so many fantastic and exciting things to find out about the Scripture. We'll cover those in another video. But until then, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Click the thumbs up, hit the bell button, share this video, and also put comments in the comment section. Send us any questions, any comments, anything that you've got. We want to see it. And listen, you will also find a link to the previous videos in the description area. You'll want to click that, and you'll want to go back and watch some of the previous videos. Until next time, God bless you. I'm Pastor Gregg Tipton. Thank you for joining us right here on New Life Today.